Hello everyone and welcome to a new video. If you've seen the title, then you probably noticed that this is a tutorial and not a vlog, but I wanted to tell you a little bit more about everything that went on before I created this image. If you're not interested, I will leave a timestamp in the description so you can skip right ahead to the tutorial part. If not, stick around and I will explain to you why I created this and how it came about. If you've been following me on Instagram or YouTube or Facebook, then you probably noticed that I have gone through a change in style. And originally I was a traditional artist, meaning that I used mostly watercolors or acrylic to create images, and I would usually draw from reference a lot and stick very close to what the reference picture looked like. A couple of years ago, during Inktober, for the first time I started to get out of my comfort zone, didn't really use references, and created Little Mr. Pumpkinhead. And from that point on, I tried to make more illustrations that tell a story or that have these characters in them. Now, for a very long time, I was very uncomfortable doing digital. I'm using a Wacom Intuos Art, which I have here, which is this one. So it's a non-screen tablet, meaning that I had trouble in the beginning with my hand-eye coordination, because you're like drawing on the tablet and then looking at the screen. That was the first problem that I had, and it took me, I don't know, like 2 years to finally sit down and just work on trying to get used to it, and eventually I did. November last year I followed a digital painting tutorial on SVS Learn, and that sort of got me into it. I think I worked on that one piece for about a week, and then I sort of got used to the feel of drawing on my tablet. But I wasn't doing any sketches or line art or anything because that was still too difficult. I just used it to paint. And I don't know, like a couple of months later, for New Year's, I remember for New Year's, I created a New Year piece. Let me check. It was this one, if you remember. So I first drew it in my sketchbook with a brush pen, and I liked the line art so much that I just decided to scan it and then try and convert it into digital. And I believe there is a video of my process on how to extract the line art from a scan, so I will leave it in the description below as well. And that is sort of how my digital journey started and how I got used to it. But I wasn't really happy with how I was coloring everything. I kept it fairly simple, like all my Little Mr. Pumpkinhead illustrations, they were flat layers, there were barely any gradients, I believe. I just used a different layer with like hard edges for the shadows even, and I didn't really like it. I wanted my art, my digital art, to look traditional, I think. Yeah, I think you can describe it like that. There are several amazing artists who, and just in general, there is like a very wide variety or range that you can render an image with, especially digital. I mean, there are barely any limits. So it was hard for me to find someone that I genuinely liked for his or her style, and eventually I found someone, and I will show you who this person is. Well, not the person, but his art. I discovered him on Kickstarter, I believe, and he was kickstarting his 5th transmission book, which I have over here, and I'm talking about Matt Dixon. Now, when these books arrived, I just fell in love instantly. I had seen his work online, but seeing it in print and looking at every detail, it was so amazing. And I will show you 2 of my favorites, which is, yeah, this one. I just really liked, I'm looking at it on the screen right now when I'm recording this, and it looks so beautiful. I mean, the colors of the green, I don't even like green, and all of a sudden I saw this and I'm like, that's the most beautiful green I've ever seen. And it was so beautifully lit. The details are amazing. He has like these really nice sparkling things that make it just so magical. Oh, I love it. And I'm gonna see if I can like show you up close. I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, so if you look at it up close, you can still see that it's not really that detailed. It's still like actual brush strokes, or at least it looks like it. Anyway, I will leave a link to his website in the description as well. If you want to go and check out his art or his projects, please go do that. He really is amazing. I also, another one, yeah, with a green background, well, sort of, not as bright as the other one, but just the lighting, it's so great, and I can't stop looking at them. And every time that I am like unsure of something, of how I should render it or draw it, I usually just flip through his books and I'm like, oh my god, yeah, he does it like that, and then I see if I can apply it to my own art, which is very, very nice to do, learning from another artist without actually copying. And I did try to do a master study of this because I wanted to grasp the intensity of the color and see if I can figure out how he rendered it. And I think I got maybe like halfway, and I did a part of the robot. I didn't even do the squirrel. I just tried to get the colors right and the lighting intensity. But as with everything, a master study can be pretty tedious if it takes a really long time. So I eventually stopped doing that. And then 2 weeks later, I was looking at the books again and was just so motivated to do something like in the same way. And I started Googling. I was like, there must be some tutorial or something of him that explains his process. And there is. I found it. It's on YouTube. I can't believe that I didn't find it before. But there is an entire video, and well, there's no sound, there's no talking during this video. But there is a written description that I didn't read, but it's very elaborate. I scrolled through it and read some parts that I didn't really understand what were going on in the video. But he does it so well, and it is so clear. And he is actually working sort of the same way that Loish works, mostly just using one layer, which is kind of like you would work if you were working traditional, because if you're doing traditional, there is just one layer and that's your canvas, and then you put color on them. It's not like you can separate the layers individually. So it was pretty nice, and what you're gonna see in the tutorial is fairly the same process, but you know, I want to do the voiceover and give you my thoughts and struggles and everything that happened during the creation of the piece, of course. So like the epiphany I had was when I was doing a test drawing. Yeah, I made a test drawing to see if I could figure out what brushes I was going to use, how my software was going to handle it, and I didn't really... Oh, there's something on my eye and it's so itching. It's annoying. Okay, sorry. So I didn't know what to draw, but I knew I wanted to do something in this style, and so it had to be with trees. And then I remember that last year, was it last year? No, 2 years ago already, the 2017 Inktober challenge, I made a piece of my little Mr. Pumpkinhead and something in trees. So I scrolled through my Instagram, seeing my old posts from that year and deciding to redraw one of them. And as I said before, it is sometimes easier for me to just draw in my sketchbook than to do it digitally. Also because you can sit on your couch comfortably and it's just easier. I don't have an iPad or anything, so sketchbooks are still my go-to material, and I will show you the sketch. Now, there's another sketch above and on the side, but that's fine. Now, it's very light, so I'm not sure if you can see it, meaning that this was little Mr. Pumpkinhead, and this is a baby chick that sort of fell out of this giant tree. And as you can see here, I didn't really focus on the background. I focused solely on what I had drawn in the original Inktober piece. Now that is how I start, and then I take a picture of it so that I can load it onto my computer and use that one as a base for the image. And of course, the tutorial that I'm going to show you is not for this image, but for this one, which I did the same process. So, whoops. Oh, everything is falling out. Yes. Okay, so there are two... Oh, wait. I'm going to do this differently. As you can see, there is this one. This is the one in the tutorial, and then this one is maybe going to be a next video. I'm still working on rendering that. If you're following me on Instagram, you can see these, evolve in my stories. And as you can see, I started out with very, very tiny sketches, because this is my finger, sort of like maybe like 2-3 centimeters, and these are more like 5-6 centimeters in height. Okay, so that is how I start the drawings, and then afterwards I just load them into my computer and start drawing over them, and then you will see the rest in the tutorial. And the reason why I wanted to do this kind of style is because I have a bigger project in mind, and for this bigger project I am going to do several illustrations. I don't really want to talk more about it, just in case it never turns into anything, but since this style is so new, I don't want to start a big project yet without a decent preparation. So I decided to make several individual paintings to just get used to the style. It's gonna, your style and the way you work is gonna change and evolve, but I don't want it to evolve too much so that the beginning of my project is going to look completely different from the end of my project. And therefore I'm doing these just standalone illustrations to you know, build myself and then learn and try new things, because with digital, I can tell you this already before the tutorial starts, on the first illustration that I created, which you will see here, I will post it there, then it took me, I don't know, even though I had the sketch already and I knew what I was doing, it took me about 10 hours to render it completely, and it wasn't even that big, like in file size. I think I did it on A4 because I didn't think it would turn into anything. It was just a test. And then all of a sudden I'm getting so into it and I am amazed by what it looks like that I feel that I just have to finish it to share it with the world. And from that moment on, from the moment I made that piece, I fell in love. I fell in love with that style, and I've been doing that style since. It's taken me quite a long time to render them. The second one that you're gonna see in this tutorial took me, I don't know, maybe like 5 hours. I have about an hour every day that I can spend on art, and so I try to work on one piece every week. But that's just not always possible, unfortunately. Things always happen, things get in between. But yeah, so I hope you like the tutorial. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. You're gonna ask me about the brushes. I've thought about that, and I currently have a set of brushes that I use for these illustrations, because I'm already working on my 4th one, I think. But I don't want to like distribute them yet. I mean, I'm gonna give them away for free eventually, because they're mainly just a collection of brushes that I got from other free brush sets, so they wouldn't be mine, but the settings would be mine, because I change them depending on what I need, of course. And I currently don't feel comfortable sharing them yet, since I'm still developing this style and way of working. So eventually, when I do, I will let you know, and I will tell you where you can find them when I figure out where to put them. So yeah, now like I said, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. I do read them, I answer them as soon as I can. And yeah, let's get on to the tutorial. If you have missed the intro, I can tell you that I usually do my sketches in my sketchbook and then take a picture to load them into Sketchbook, which is the software that I'm currently using. And I am resizing the image to the size of my canvas, which is an A3 size at 300 dpi. I will leave the sizes in the description below. Next, I am making sure that my sketch layer is on multiply, and I forgot to turn it into a grayscale. So if you do this yourself, make sure that the sketch itself is black and white. To do this in Sketchbook, you need to go to the Image menu, then Adjust, and click Grayscale. Now I lightened the sketch layer a little bit because it was a bit too harsh, and then underneath I am using a layer of a flat color, which is gray, and it is easier to put in darker values and lighter values on a gray scale that's kind of a mid-tone. So the layer you see here is a mid-tone, and then I am putting on dark and light. The first part of this tutorial is going to focus on putting in the light and dark values. I always start with what I know, and I know that the eyes of my character are going to be the darkest value in the entire painting, and that the light source is going to come from the tree lights. Therefore, I know that the face of my character will be lit, and I put in those light and dark values first before moving on to the rest. From all the courses I've followed online, starting with what you know is probably the best advice. If you're unsure of what to do, it will be the first thing you can go to start completing your painting. And since I know that the snow is going to be a little lighter than my lights, I was able to put in those as well. When I move forward in the painting, I always ask myself the question, what is the light going to hit next? And since the face is the closest, I start with that. Doing a value study like this is always a good idea to check if your image reads well, especially if you zoom out and make it really small. If the contrast in a tiny image allows you to tell what it is, then you're on the good track. Currently, I am still working in several different layers. Unfortunately, my computer screen is not big enough to make sure that the different tabs I have open are visible. At this time in the painting, I usually work with 3 to 4 layers. The bottom layer will be the flat gray color, and above that will be either my sketch or a layer that I am putting in the background values for. Afterwards, I will have my sketch layer, and completely on top I will have another layer where I put in the values. As I've said before, only the sketch layer has the multiply setting. All the other layers are the normal setting. Whenever I start doubting myself and I'm not sure what direction I want the painting to go, I will add several separate layers to add highlights or shadows. Since I am working digital, I am not ashamed to use all the benefits of working digital. I find that figuring out the values is the most important part of a painting, and therefore I spend a lot of time on it. The speed that you are watching now is the original speed times 2. Because this video is quite long already, I am going to speed it up even more. If you've seen the intro, then you know that I talked about the brush set that I'm using, and I currently don't feel comfortable sharing them with you because I'm still working on this technique, and if I do put a set together, I want it to be the complete set that I am using for all these kind of illustrations. I've currently already finished 4th or 5th illustrations in this style, and I can tell you that I've already added several more brushes to this set. Because of that, I want to wait a little longer until I know for sure that the set is complete before I share it with all of you. If you cannot wait, I can tell you that I got all these brushes for free on the Sketchbook blog. If you go to their blog, you can search for brushes and you will find every blog post that contains brushes or is a tutorial about brushes. Now, it's been said by several artists over and over again, brushes don't make the artist. I still don't know what brushes Matt Dixon uses, and I bet he uses Photoshop and not Sketchbook Pro. Therefore, I am not even able to use the same brushes he does, and you might not have Sketchbook Pro, you might have Krita. So I would advise you to just search through your brushes, figure out what works for you, and use those. Just make your own set. Now a little bit more about the illustration here. In a few minutes you will see that I'm starting to add layers. Currently I'm still using 4 layers, of which one, the top one, I'm not even using that one. Sometimes I'm just creating layers and not using them. So the reason why I'm creating multiple layers is because I am unsure of where I want this piece to go. So I create multiple layers to test things out, to see what I like and don't like, and not have too much impact on what I have already created. So that is the positive thing about working digitally, that you can do that. And even though this is just a value study, I do feel that for me it is important in this step that I also pay attention to the texture in my painting. So the background has a very watercolor texture to it. That's because of the brush that I'm using, but it was also deliberate that I made the size of the brush the size that it has. And you will also see me put in the snow and more texture on the snow a little bit later. In case you are wondering, the speed at which you're looking right now is the original speed times 8, and if I'm not mistaken it took me about, I don't know, like 3 to 5 hours to complete this, give or take, because I don't always draw constantly. Sometimes I'm looking at my computer screen or my phone or my TV, but that's around the time that it took me. Now, as you can see, there isn't really a big contrast between the background and my character, so I wanted to make the background darker so that the main focus is definitely on my character and the tree itself. I knew that I wanted this to be a night scene, so I'm going dark as much as I can. Now I'm also, in the back of my mind, I'm also thinking about the colors. So for this one I knew that the background was going to be blue, and of course my pumpkin is going to be orange, and orange is towards the red side, which means that it's probably going to get the focus anyway because it is red. And if you know a little bit about color theory, then you know that either red colors get the most focus or the area where there is the most contrast. I'm going to pause the image here and tell you about the layers. I have currently 2 groups. The group below is the one with the original value study, and I use this as a backup in case I mess up the coloring process. The group on top is the visible group. It is a copy of the first group that I created, and in this one I will add the color. In this group I currently have 3 layers. The top layer is my value study layers all merged into one layer, and this one is set to multiply. Below that I have a color layer to which I will add my colors. It can also be considered as a foreground layer, and this one is set to normal. And underneath that I have the background layer. This is totally optional depending on how you paint, but I like my front and back separate in the beginning, and this one is also set to normal. For the colors I apply the same principle, start with what I know, and I know that my pumpkin is orange, and I know the color of his body, I know the color of the tree, so I am putting in those colors first before figuring out anything else. At this stage, I am not concerned with lighting and how my light source affects the areas around it. I only focus on what color goes where and whether or not they fit together. For this image, I did not take the time to do a color composition because I knew that the colors I would be using would be limited to the ones that you're currently seeing. When I add the colors, I mostly use the big brush on the left or the airbrush that I'm currently using. Next comes my favorite part, putting in the light, and for this I am asking myself the exact same question: what is the light going to hit next and how is it going to affect the areas around it? If I'm confident about where my light is supposed to go, I will add the light directly on the color layer, but sometimes I am not sure what the effect is going to be, and therefore I create a separate layer above everything else and set it to overlay. The overlay adds an extra effect to the light you put in. The light I am putting in right now is not related to the light source itself. I just wanted to lighten up the background. When you put in lights, it is important to know the effect the lighting is going to have on the image overall. This is where color theory comes in. You have cold colors and warm colors. In this case, my background is blue and therefore a cold color. So if I add white to it, it is not going to change the effect the color has on the overall feeling of my painting. It is going to remain cold. If in this case my background was more towards the warm side and would have had like an orange or a red background, I would have chosen a light yellow instead of a white, because white would have pulled it more towards the cold side. After I am happy with how my image looks overall, I am cleaning up my layers. I am removing the ones that I didn't use or don't need anymore, and I eventually will merge everything into one layer. Once I have one layer left, I will keep using that one layer, and I always use the color picker to select the colors that are already on the painting. In this stage, I rarely add in new colors unless I need like a really pure color to add in a detail or for a specific reason. And this stage is hard to explain because I am just painting and rendering the image depending on what I feel it needs. When I was younger and I would get to this stage of a tutorial, I lost confidence, basically because this part is a part that cannot be explained. It is pure experience and knowledge of the tools that you're using. This is the part where the artist, his or her personal style comes into play, because I cannot explain to you how I rendered this. This is just pure feeling that I'm going on. It is my past experience of painting traditionally and mostly with acrylic on this one because it has the same feel to it. So for the rest of this video, I am going to speed it up and get back to you when we get to the finishing touches. last step is of course the finishing touches, making sure that your painting looks exactly like you want it to be. And for this I am creating an overlay layer above my painting and adding in extra colors. Since this is on a separate layer, this is something you can play around with, change the color, change the opacity, do whatever you feel like as long as you love it. Whenever I am happy with a change that I made in the overlay layer, I will merge that layer with the painting below in order to fix it. So to me, whenever I merge a layer, I know that I want to keep that change. Of course, this is digital and you can always use Ctrl-Z to separate the layers again. Earlier in the tutorial, I used the overlay layer to lighten the background, and now I am mostly using it to add more highlights or to intensify the colors. Once I am happy with the light, I will merge everything into one layer again and continue working on that layer itself without any special layer settings. It's all just set to normal. The changes I am putting in here is again your personal style that comes into play. I am looking at the screen right now and I wouldn't even be able to explain to you what I am doing while I'm seeing it. At one point though, I realized I wanted more texture in my tree, so that is eventually what I ended up doing for way too long. At this point, I am going to start in putting my highlights in, meaning my absolute lightest values in the painting. And because I am not sure about the effect it's going to have, I'm going to create a new layer set to normal this time because I wanted to have the pure color. And I'm going to add in highlights here and there or change colors here and there. This is basically the final details that you add to your painting. After this, you know you're practically done. The next thing I am doing is totally personal preference. While I was testing out several brushes in the first painting that I made in this style, I discovered a watercolor brush that has this really nice texture, and using it in combination with the overlay or the color dodge setting, it has a really nice effect and adds a really nice texture to my overall painting. Here you can see me play around with it with several settings, several colors, and eventually I ended up using the colors that match the area that I was covering. So for the background I would use a blue color selected from the painting itself, maybe put a little bit lighter. And the same thing goes for the face of my pumpkin, the snow. This again is a trial and error. I have done my first painting where I selected just one color, put it over the entire canvas, and it looked great. For this painting I tried to do the same thing like you see here, but it had a totally different effect. In the end, I put in my logo for this year, and I can call this one finished. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. I try to answer as soon as possible, and until next time.